team supporting us today. And to start, I want to welcome Eric Powell from the Corporation for National and Community Service. Take it away, Eric.
Thank you, Lois, and welcome to everyone. Whether this is your first time attending one of these supervisor webinars or you're a veteran and have attended all of them, we welcome you and hope that our material is relevant for you as we have a wonderful training scheduled for you. On behalf of the Corporation for National and Community Service and the AmeriCorps Vista program, we're happy that you're here to learn and to be as most effective as you can at being sub-site supervisors. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Lois to get us started.
Thank you, Eric. You've heard from Eric and you've heard from me. We're also joined today by our colleague Amy Kanata from Education Northwest in Portland, Oregon, who's monitoring the Q&A and chat panels and helping to facilitate the Q&A. And Andy Clark, also from Education Northwest, will be managing the back-end functions during the webinar. We would also like to welcome our two guest speakers for today's webinar, Misty Piggy and Jimmy O'Brien. Misty is responsible for managing, coordinating, and implementing the statewide AmeriCorps Vista project at Cornerstone Assistance Network, which is located in Fort Worth, Texas. She currently has 1 Vista leader and 19 Vistas serving in 8 cities and in 5 counties in Texas. Misty is passionate about fighting poverty. She's previously served as an AmeriCorps Vista leader for 1 year and a Community Health Corps Vista member for 2. Jimmy is the program director for the Oregon Asset Building Corporation, a Vista program with members throughout the Oregon's Willamette Valley. Before supervising here, he served as its Vista leader. He completed his first term at a nonprofit in rural Maryland in 2008 and came back to the nonprofit sector in 2012 after earning an MFA in writing. Welcome to both our guest speakers. Here's what we hope you'll get out of this webinar. We'd like you to be able to identify the key challenges you're facing to training your sub-site supervisors effectively and completely, to recognize the critical importance of regular communication and collaboration with your sub-site supervisors throughout the project lifecycle, and formulate and adopt realistic solutions to address your particular challenges. I'd like to start by asking you this. What comes to mind when you think about training your sub-sites? For instance, do you think, I'm really, really, really busy, or, but my sub-sites are located all over the state, or how can I coordinate schedules with all these people? Do you think, where does my responsibility end and theirs begin? What topics should I cover? How should I do it, in person or remotely? And what if they want to be autonomous and not an integral part of our whole program? We're going to launch a poll now to find out what your issues are. The poll will appear in the lower right-hand portion of your screen. And when it does appear, select one or more answers that reflect your most pressing issue or issues. And you'll have about a minute for this. I think we're waiting for the poll.
Hey Lois, this is Amy and Indy in Portland, and we're working on getting the poll up for you all. Just hold tight 1 second here.
Great. Terrific. It's up now, and if you could just pick one or more that applies to you. Okay, we're going to have another 20 or 30 seconds to complete the poll. Okay, can we wrap up and then see what the results are?
So folks are just finishing up, and we still have some questions coming in. So as soon as those go into the system, we'll be able to show all the results.
Terrific. Well, there are quite a few that have geography and distance seems to be the most significant. Your own time constraints is very important. Coordination, there's something in every one of these categories, which is good because we intend to deal with issues related to all of these challenges throughout the rest of the webinar. Okay. Let's now look at some overall principles and actions that you can take to help ensure that your subsite will succeed. I'm going to focus here on 6 main factors. First, and perhaps most importantly, consider the relationship between you and your subsite supervisors as a collaboration. It really won't succeed without both of you fulfilling your respective responsibilities. One without the other will create substantial problems. Make sure that you share your overall plan with your subsite supervisors. It puts the individual site's project goals into a larger context that's important for full understanding of what they're doing and what they want to accomplish. Establish a regular communication channel and be consistent. This is critically important. Also, be clear up front about your expectations of your subsite supervisors so there are no surprises down the line. Plan out your orientation carefully. Also, plan and coordinate around reporting. You both have important roles and tasks in this effort, and you can support one another here. Now we're going to delve into a key issue. Who is responsible for what? We'll look into the intermediary's macro responsibilities, your subsite's supervisor's key responsibilities, and which duties are commonly shared or can be shared depending upon your needs. We'll begin with your big picture responsibilities, which are very important for a successful project. First and foremost, site selection, the recruiting, choosing, and vetting of subsites. That belongs to you. Training your subsite supervisors. Partnering and collaborating on specific duties. Managing the whole project, and overall performance and evaluation. Your subsite's responsibilities are, number one, effectively onboarding members, both to your organization, their individual organizations, the community, and the VISTA project. Providing day-to-day supervision and coaching, and by day-to-day supervision and coaching, I mean providing direction, providing inspiration, providing feedback, and recognition to VISTA members throughout the life cycle. Also handling the site's reporting and evaluation duties. Now, those areas where intermediaries and subsites often share duties include the outreach, recruitment, and selection of VISTAs, preparing or writing VADs, planning and or delivering the on-site orientation and training, problem solving, and reporting and evaluation. Now, some intermediaries do all these things themselves, but many partner or even delegate some of these tasks to their subsites. It can be an effective collaboration with division of duties that depends upon individual circumstances and needs. We'll now explore in more depth the intermediary's macro responsibilities. Misty and Jimmy will both share some of their personal experiences. We'll begin with site selection, and Misty will begin.
Yes, so to select subsites for our Intermediary VISTA project, we locate and partner with organizations serving the poor in Texas through our current network partners, job and volunteer fairs, word of mouth, and referrals from our current subsites or from other agencies. We have a letter of interest and a partner site packet that we give out to anyone interested in hosting a VISTA through our project. The organizations that we choose must meet 3 basic criteria. Number 1, they must share AmeriCorps VISTA's poverty alleviating mission and 1 or more of its programming priorities for the 2014 fiscal year. Number 2, they must have a staff member willing to volunteer full-time to supervise, guide, and direct any VISTA members that are assigned to the organization. And number 3, that they are able to help Cornerstone cost-share 6 of its VISTA members. These are essentially the approaches that Cornerstone uses to find and select its subsite. Now let's hear from Jimmy about his organization and how they select subsites.
Thanks, Misty. So the way we operate is that, first of all, we view site recruitment as a year-round process. Basically, 2 weeks after our members get on board, we already are contacting sites or potential partners for the coming year. So we begin really early, and we're constantly looking for potential sites, even if we haven't issued our official RFP yet. So some of the ways we get in touch with sites and target them, aside from word of mouth and our pre-existing connections with partners, is through nonprofit associations, listservs, newsletters, social media, and all of that stuff. I really encourage people to use Twitter and Facebook and all of that. It's cheap and it's really effective and has a broad reach. Some of the things that we look for in a site is that they really have to understand that hosting a VISTA isn't like hiring another employee. It's a lot more work, and in some ways, it's the actual recruitment process is a lot more intense because we have to compare so many different criteria. Both ours as an intermediary, CNCS's as the guiding agency, and then the host sites. We have to look at how a candidate lines up with all of those. We also really want sites that have an on-the-ground understanding of poverty, meaning that they work directly with low-income populations. Obviously, the VISTAs aren't going to be doing direct service, but we want the organization to have a really good understanding of intergenerational cycles of poverty and not just sort of a lip service. So some practical sites when you begin working with sites, and again, I'd encourage you to do this as early as possible, is to look for flag words that indicate a lack of understanding about the nature of the program. So some of those that I've seen are folks who call VISTA volunteers VISTA workers or quote-unquote interns. It just means that they haven't kind of done their research, or maybe just kind of cues you into the fact that they might not quite appreciate what that role is going to look like when the VISTA shows up. Also, another kind of flag would be if the site gets pushy about certain policy aspects of hosting a VISTA, for example, no direct service. If a site begins sort of saying, oh, well, is this really direct service? Is this really not? If they begin pushing the boundaries and trying to kind of wheedle their way out of policy, it might be a sign that they're not the best fit for VISTAs. And also, if they just prove unable to meet deadlines, they might not have the manpower or the people power to host a VISTA. So I guess the takeaway there is that all parts of the recruitment process are parts also of the vetting process. From the minute you hear from somebody to the minute you approve or deny in consultation with CNCS, they're still in the application process, and you should really take that into account. And of course, you always want to look for alignment of mission and the sense of dedication to the VISTA project, as well as an overall willingness to collaborate. So when you're working with people on VADs, you want to make sure that they're receptive to your feedback and not sort of pushing you at every moment to try to, get only what they want without respecting what CNCS is looking for too. So with that, I'll turn it over to Lois.
Thank you. I think it's important to tie back what we've been hearing from our guest speakers to some of the success factors we spoke of earlier. In this case, communication and the alignment of goals. With careful site selection, you have an opportunity to set up the relationship well from the start. Are you dedicated to a shared mission? Or are they willing, in fact, excited to be part of the larger project? Are they able to engage in a real collaboration? It's important to ascertain these things up front. It will help the project succeed. We'll now hear from Misty, who will talk about the macro responsibility of training sub-site supervisors. Misty?
Yes, so in terms of training our sub-site supervisors, all of our supervisors must complete a 6-hour orientation in person at Cornerstone in order to successfully supervise the VISTAs. And we have them do this preferably before applying for a VISTA project and before a VISTA begins serving at the sub-site. An outline of the content that we cover in our supervisor's orientation can be made available to anyone who's interested in receiving a copy of it. But basically, we go over the history of national service and the history of the VISTA program with the supervisors, in addition to going over Cornerstone's relationship with the VISTA program and its relationship with current and potential partner sites. We also cover information about managing and supporting VISTA members, as well as completing the VISTA supervisor's responsibilities. Sometimes some of our supervisors are unable to come to Cornerstone due to location or schedule conflicts. Also, sometimes our supervisors are unable to attend an orientation before a VISTA member begins his or her service term. In those situations, we make sure that the supervisor has reviewed and agreed to the terms on our Memorandum of Understanding, or MOU, as early as possible. We do have all of our partner sites review and agree to an MOU, but the supervisors that have not attended an orientation receive one earlier in the application process. Our MOU covers the major roles and responsibilities that the supervisor must be aware of and must agree to before they can host the VISTA. Also, we try to get the supervisor to view the live webinars or recordings of live webinars that are available for all supervisors through the VISTA campus within the first month of the VISTA's term. For any information not covered or any questions not answered in those webinars, I do follow up with the supervisors individually and go over the information that they need to know with them. And then our VISTA supervisors receive additional training and support through the other resources that are available on VISTA campus and through one-on-one or group meetings with me as needed. So Jimmy, how does your organization train sub-sites?
Thanks, Misty. I just want to second all of that and really emphasize the importance of a MOU and making arrangements in case folks can't attend. It's really important stuff. So prior to our orientation, which is about a 4 to 5 hour training a month before the VISTAs arrive, we make sure that VADs are really, really clear and aligned with all goals, that everybody's on the same page, that there's no discrepancies in semantics. So sometimes that just means walking through everything together or kind of co-developing a position description for the CNCS recruitment website. So along with recruitment, kind of our dry run for really working together is that we hold a webinar about a month prior to the recruitment period. And during this process, we not only go through what we're looking for in candidates, but also in shared responsibilities around that, but also at the end of it, we make sure to include kind of an onboarding timeline and checklist for after the recruitment period is done. So for example, we would include in the timeline, 1 month before the VISTA arrives, make sure to call them and ask to see if they need anything, if the transition's going okay. 2 weeks before, make sure that you tell all of your staff about the responsibilities that a VISTA has and what they can and can't do and all of that sort of stuff. So for our in-person training, we hold that about a month before the VISTAs arrive, and we hold that in person. During that time, we really focus on collaborating on a plan for the members' on-site orientation. So as an intermediary, we provide a general orientation and training for members that focuses on soft skills, but we really turn to sites to provide the specific and hard skills to their members. So for example, we have some members who might be using Razor's Edge if they're in fundraising. Well, not all of our members do that. So as an intermediary site, Mercy Corps doesn't actually undertake that responsibility. So we want to make sure that the host sites have a plan for that, have a plan for orienting the member to their community too. We also make sure that we explain our organization's mission and vision for the VISTA project, just so people know where we're coming from and how our organization works with communities, because we really carry that over into VISTA. And it's actually very parallel to VISTA, and one of the reasons our organization took the project on. So it's important to us. We also make sure that we do a rundown on major policies, which we impress upon people from the minute we talk to them. But we want to make sure that they're really aware of it, because we want 100% compliance with federal policies. So we make sure that we have our CNCS officer come and talk through everything with the site hosts. So this is everything from making sure that they understand that they can assign members outside tasks, to making sure that they know that members need to have the same kind of computer that everybody else is in the office has. You can't stick them on a 486 from 1982 while everybody else is working on a brand new iMac or something like that. We also establish a conflict resolution process, and that would be, we actually have a flow chart for that, showing when we'll become involved in a conflict, when CNCS will become involved in a conflict, and exactly what that breakdown will look like. So just making sure supervisors know that if a member is coming late into their site a couple times, and that's something they can handle. If they're doing it regularly, then we need to be involved and just kind of make sure the member knows their responsibilities. And let's say theoretically the member keeps doing it and it starts impacting their service, then we would involve CNCS. So just making sure that host sites understand how that's going to work if there are issues. And then really importantly and really pragmatically is also just making sure that the supervisors know how to report data. We use a Google Docs system, so it's actually really easy, but we just walk them through it and make sure that they know the details about that, so that there isn't any later confusion. So with that, I will turn it over to Lois.
Thank you. So what should you include in an orientation of your subsite supervisors? We've heard from two supervisors and who've explained a little bit about what they've included. Well, we think that these are the basic things that should be included. First of all, big picture stuff. All the background information that you got at SO, at Supervisor Orientation, about CNCS and VISTA, its mission and capacity building, what it really means. In addition, a project overview, your larger plan, and how the individual subsites will fit into that overall plan. Recruitment and selection of members based on the VADs. Some intermediaries do this all by themselves, others involve the subsites, and some delegate it to the subsites. It's a negotiation often. Member onboarding and on-site orientation and training. the how, the why, the where. This is, again, something that you can get direction from the intermediary will provide direction, but sometimes the intermediary would prefer, oftentimes they would prefer that the sub-site supervisors do a version at the local sites. Your expectations around day-to-day supervision. This is a must. You need to be clear about what are your must-haves and what are your nice-to-haves in terms of the day-to-day functioning of the project. Member support. This is one of the primary responsibilities of the sub-site supervisor, and it's important to show them how they can best provide direction, coaching, feedback, and recognition. Problem solving, as Jimmy just talked about, as conflicts arise, this is an important thing to deal with as it arises so it doesn't build up. VISTA rules and regulations. Again, VISTA is not an employee. This is an important thing that the sub-site soups need to understand. And prohibited activities. If there's a CNCS staff person nearby and they're available, it's probably a good idea to bring them into this orientation. But if not, you can certainly summarize the key points. A communication plan. How will you stay in touch with the sub-site supervisor? What kind of method? Is it email? Is it a phone conversation? How frequent? And lastly, reporting and evaluation, what each of you are going to do in the process. We will be posting a link to a one-pager that contains this information on the SOUPS webinar landing page after the webinar is completed. Now, to restate the obvious, you need to have a plan to orient your sub-site supervisors very, very carefully. It will take some time and some organizing, but we really feel that it will pay off in the long run. Remember that the sub-site supervisors have not been to supervisor orientation. They're relying on you to get them up to speed. Make sure also that you explain carefully how you will be partnering to manage the project and to support VISTAs throughout the cycle. Now at this point we're going to take a couple of minutes and see if you have any questions. I do see some questions are appearing. We'll have a time for maybe 3 or 4, and then we'll get to the rest of them at the end of the webinar.
Hi Lois, this is Amy at Education Northwest in Portland, and we've been monitoring the questions that are coming in. There have been a lot of questions about getting sample materials from Jimmy and Misty, and we will be providing some samples. I also want to encourage folks to visit the VISTA campus and go to the supervisor section and explore, because we do have many, many sample resources up there available for you. So a question came in from Chad that I think is very intriguing, and the question is, and we can sort of, whoever wants to take this question can type in, but how do you help site supervisors understand the prohibition against a VISTA member filling a staff position or engaging in activities that would supplant the tasks of paid staff or existing volunteers? So how would you help site supervisors understand the prohibition against VISTA members filling a staff position? Any of our panelists want to take this one?
I can do that, I think.
Great.
Okay, thanks, Jenny.
So basically the way I would describe it and kind of have described it in the past is just actually in conjunction with our CNCS officer, because this one is a little more detailed. As far as explaining the purpose behind it, I always just make sure that they understand that VISTAs aren't intended to be stopgaps. VISTAs are intended to be developing programs. They're supposed to be expanding services and creating new things, not just kind of filling in for someone else. as far as just kind of simply doing it, as far as determining whether or not something is staff replacement, it can sometimes be as simple as looking at the VAD and saying, okay, this sounds like something, there's a lot of maybe more operational functions in this, and checking in with them. Okay, so if the VAD is titled, program assistant, you can just ask them, have you guys, let a program director go recently? Have you let someone else go? So sometimes just looking at their website and seeing if there have been any staff changes, or just asking them directly. Most people are going to be honest with you. So just making sure that they understand not only what it is, but why they can't do it, I think is important.
Thank you, Jimmy. That was really helpful. And also on the Vista campus, there are a lot of resources available about what it means to build capacity for your Vistas. So I encourage folks to check those resources out as well and share them with your subsites, since capacity building is what we're all about here. Natasha had a question. She said that it's been several years since she went to supervisor training and wanted to know if the most recent supervisor training materials are available and if there are exercises. And the answer is yes, Natasha. All the most up-to-date Vista supervisor materials from the in-person training are available on the Vista campus in the supervisor section, including copies of the PowerPoint slides that the facilitators use, the workbook that supervisors are given, and many, many other materials are available on the Vista campus. So if you haven't visited the Vista campus lately, or you've never visited, I encourage you to take a look and share some of those materials with your subsites or incorporate them into your subsite training. Okay, I think that is all we have for now, Lois. I'll turn it back over to you.
Great, thank you. Now we're just going to briefly review the kinds of things that you can partner with your subsite supervisors on. We mentioned these earlier: outreach, recruitment and selection, VAD preparation, OSOT planning and delivery, problem solving, and reporting and evaluation. Now, how you divide up these tasks or collaborate on them will depend on your specific circumstances and needs and those of your subsite supervisors. A reminder that this kind of coordination does take communication. Be sure to set up those channels so that you can both effectively accomplish your goals. You want to reinforce one another and not duplicate efforts or leave out important tasks. Now we're going to actually visit the Vista campus, all of us. The campus includes dedicated sections for members, leaders, state offices, and supervisors. And we also call the section for supervisors the SUPS campus. The SUPS campus is a place for you to get the resources and help to manage your Vista project and connect with your peers. Just before we actually get into the nitty-gritty of going there, how many of you have visited the Vista campus? And if you could just use the green check or the red check, green for yes and red for no, that's located in the panel to the right of your name, and let us know if you've been to the campus. Okay. All right. Seems like lots of you have been. Some. Okay, we have an X, a red X. Okay, well, thank you. There is on the campus a Working with Subsites section that includes a self-directed tutorial and other resources. We're going to visit that section right now and download a resource that will help you determine who does what. It's a checklist that was designed for intermediaries to work with their subsite supervisors to lay a foundation for project success. We'll also include links to both of these resources on the landing page of the SUPS webinar when we post the recording. Let's go to the SUPS campus to review this resource. Andy is going to share a web browser with you now.
So you might want to click the tab at the top of your screen on the left that says View, and that should take you to the login page of the Vista campus. And you probably will either need to log in or choose Enter Campus as a Guest, but at this point you're in control of this page. So folks should go ahead and click on Enter as a Guest or Log In. And then Indy just posted the directions in the chat panel. So you'll want to go to the Roles and Responsibilities section, and that's the little binder icon in the middle of your screen. And then from there, you'll want to navigate to the section called Working with Subsites in the lower right-hand corner. And then you'll scroll down that page to find and select the Sponsor Subsite Major Tasks at a Glance document. And that is a Word document that you can use with your subsite supervisors to divvy up the important tasks that you need to take care of throughout the year. And just in case you're having any problems, I'm going to go ahead and give you the direct link. And as Lois mentioned, we'll be sure that the link to this is also included on the page for the webinar recording, and we will send you an email when that's posted just so that everyone has that link right in your inbox. That'll just take us a couple days.
We'll give you a few minutes to complete this.
And just to, this is Amy again in Portland on the tech side. Hopefully this is working for folks. If not, again, I provided you the direct link in the chat panel, and we'll be sure to include it in the materials that we post on the campus.
This is a great resource for identifying all the things that you need to do, that need to get done, and which things that you can negotiate with your subsite supervisors with, or which things are your responsibility. It's very, very handy, very, very handy checklist. Okay, now we're going to go to Misty, and she's going to talk a little bit about the intermediary's responsibility to manage the whole project. Misty?
Yes, so managing a VISTA project definitely requires strong coordination and strong organizational skills. What helps me is setting deadlines earlier than the deadlines that are given to me by the state office. And I usually set earlier deadlines for myself and also for our subsite supervisors, just so that there aren't any last-minute frustrations or challenges. I also use and modify calendars that the state office provides to us. For example, our state office provides us with a pre-service orientation / recruitment calendar, and it lists all of the deadlines for upcoming recruitment cycles. So I sort of downloaded a copy of this calendar and modified it. I added additional and earlier deadlines to the calendar. And then I printed a copy and I posted it on my bulletin board here at work for future reference. The deadlines do change, but I can always go back and check and modify it in this print and repost on my bulletin board. But I use the calendar as a guide to know when to contact the subsite supervisors regarding future recruitment cycles. And I believe a copy of the calendar will be made available to you all. And setting earlier deadlines and using a modified calendar are just two examples of how I coordinate, organize, and manage our VISTA project here. But Jimmy will now provide some additional information and examples about managing his VISTA project.
Thanks, Misty. So as far as what I do, I would definitely encourage the calendaring option. We always set up a calendar for major events and inform our site supervisors well in advance. You know, for example, the Martin Luther King Day of Service. We also do an Earth Day of Service. So we always let them know that well in advance, as well as days when they'll have their reports due, their quarterly reports. So with that, we always use, or for quarterly reports, we use a data collection tool like Google Docs. In fact, we do use Google Docs. It's really simple. Everybody has a Google account, and it can automatically aggregate data for you and export it in an Excel format really simply, and there's lots of great like YouTube tutorials on how to do that. I would really encourage you to use an electronic method that aggregates the data for you, just because it takes a lot of the human error out of the mix, and it's free. I would also encourage you to definitely train your site supervisors on how to do that and some of the kind of rules around that. So for example, we have sites that are both focused on the Healthy Futures focus area and the Economic Opportunity focus area. And they each have different performance measures, but and even within those, we have folks that are working on slightly different projects. So not all the performance measures are going to apply to every site, and we just make sure that everybody understands that, and that they're all just filling out a one standard document, and they just put zeros in the fields that don't apply to them. So we just make sure we go over little things like that before we send it out. We always keep our program officer with CNCS in the loop. We work pretty closely with her and have a good relationship with her. So I'd encourage those of you, especially those of you who are operating in mid-size or larger projects, to really work with your program officer. They're always busy, but they're partially there to be a resource for you. And they've been doing this for a longer time than most of us, and also understand the kind of really the subtle details of policy that sometimes those of us in our position aren't entirely aware of. So they're very helpful, and I would encourage you to keep them in the loop. The last thing you want to do if an issue is mounting is to just kind of drop it on someone, because usually CNCS can provide you guidance on how to manage that appropriately. So that leads me to conflict management, and that always encourage people to respond quickly to growing conflicts with site supervisors, but also appropriately. So if a VISTA member is having a real issue with the way their supervisor is supervising them, or in some cases not dedicating time to supervise them, you want to jump on that right away. But at that point, you don't want to pull out policy left and right and start kind of running down the MOU and explaining all the different things that they or all the different principles that they violated. You just want to be very blunt with them about their responsibilities. And if things continue, then you can kind of take it up a notch and involve CNCS and everything. But definitely quick response is important. And my kind of hard and fast rule is to be clear and firm about professional expectations. So things like getting data in on time, holding to policy, and all of that stuff. But try to be understanding and collaborative about interpersonal ones. So there are always going to be people who bump heads. VISTA members and supervisors, no matter how perfect your team is, there's going to be some interpersonal issues, and that usually requires a little more finesse, and it's not as clear-cut as, say, a supervisor assigning a member to, go out and rake the lawn or something like that. It's not as clear-cut. So you want to be more diligent and more detailed about how you're going to approach those interpersonal issues because the line isn't as firm. So with that, I believe I am going to hand it back over to Misty.
Yes, and at this point I'll talk about overall performance, specifically how our VISTA project measures the performance of the sub-site supervisors. And we usually do this through quarterly performance review evaluations. These evaluations must be completed by both the VISTA member and the VISTA supervisor, so we also review, or we also measure the performance of our VISTAs as well. But for both parties, it is optional to share responses with one another. The VISTA member evaluates our sub-site supervisors on things such as availability, communication, general supervision, and holding the VISTA member accountable to the VISTA assignment description. Also on orienting the member, supporting the member, and advocating for the member. The VISTA also identifies the sub-site supervisor's greatest strengths and areas that they need more support from the supervisor. A copy of the evaluation that we give to our VISTA members will be made available to you all. The VISTA supervisor in turn evaluates our members on things such as initiative, professionalism, attitude, commitment, and project-specific skills. And then our supervisor also indicates a plan for improvement for the members and outlines the VISTA's major accomplishments. We do tally the responses together from all of our sub-sites to see how well Cornerstone is doing in terms of preparing the VISTA supervisors at our orientation. And for any areas that are lacking or for any areas where the sub-site supervisors are rated poor, I do contact those supervisors individually and offer resources to help them improve those areas. And then in our future performance review evaluations, we do hope to see that the sub-site supervisor has improved after they've received more support and more guidance. And we're currently in the process of creating an evaluation that measures the overall performance of our VISTA project, as well as the supervisors and members' experience and satisfaction with our VISTA project. At this point, Jimmy will now explain how his project measures overall performance and also does reporting.
Thanks. So we track both qualitative and quantitative data and compare those two. So what I mean by that is that every month when we collect data from members and every quarter when we collect data from supervisors, what we look at is not only are folks making or meeting CNCS performance measures, but what are people saying about how happy they are at this site or with this arrangement? For example, there have been cases where members have been really productive, ahead of schedule and everything else, but they've been really unhappy with their supervisors, or vice versa. The supervisor is sometimes completely happy with the professional manner of the VISTA, but really unhappy about the way that he or she has been kind of carrying themselves. And so we want to make sure that everything's lining up there. And, one site that's performing really well on an interpersonal level might need, but poorly on a professional level, is going to need a different kind of attention than someone who's doing the inverse. But we view both of them, both of those facets of the program as equally important. We also make sure that we create visuals to track the program performance against our CNCS goals. We use those to present to our own board and to track our own goals and everything else. And I believe there's a sample that's going to go out with this. We also make sure that we're staying in touch with members. Sometimes the best way to measure our relationship with the sub-sites is by looking at how happy and productive the members are being, because that's going to tell us where we need to direct our efforts more. If we have gaps in the services that we're offering or the training that we're offering. And it's also important, too, to, of course, survey and talk to the site supervisors on a regular basis. But we've found that the best litmus is often of how things are going is often actually talking to the members, because they're coming in without any particular bias and without a lot of history usually with this organization. So that's definitely someone you should pay attention to very closely when you're looking at managing or renewing your site supervisors. Whenever we go forward with possibly renewing a site, we check in with the members to say, okay, would you guys actually recommend that a VISTA be here next year? So it's important to keep in touch with them as well. We're also, of course, looking for a balance between personal and professional growth that members report. So we want to make sure that they're meeting or at least very close to CNCS goals, but we also want to make sure that they're able to go to trainings and that they feel like they're achieving something. So it's really just walking a fine line that we're looking for. and trying to support both parties as best as possible. So I think, Lois, it's back to you.
Great. Thank you, Jimmy. Well, now we'd like to hear some more from you. What questions do you have or specific recommendations that are related to the time and coordination issues? Things that have interfered or you feel will interfere with your training of the subsites. We will get to some of the other challenges in due course. We're going to take them one at a time. Now you can direct your question to one of the person specifically if you want to ask Jimmy or Misty or Eric from CNCS, or just put it out to everyone. So type in your questions in the Q&A, and we will get to them.
Lois, we have a couple questions that I'm not sure if you want to address them now. They don't necessarily fit into the 4 categories. Would you like to address those now while people are thinking of other questions?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, so we had some from a little earlier in the session that were posted in the chat panel, and I appreciate everyone working with the chat and the Q&A. You're all doing a really great job with that. I know that's a shift from earlier sessions. Jennifer McCardle was talking about some struggles that she's had with training supervisors who have a lot more experience than she does and that have been doing the work for a long time, and how to engage them in training. And she wanted to know if anyone had suggestions for cutting through some of the attitudes and helping supervisors appreciate training, not just necessarily folks coming in and sitting on their computers the whole time. So I think this is really about how do you engage your sub-site supervisors while they're at training so that they're not sort of off checking email and doing other things. So anybody on the panel want to address that question? We did get a really nice response from Christine, who responded to Jennifer and said she's also had the same issue in the past, and that she added some interactive activities, like a speed networking activity, to really get the supervisors engaged and meeting each other and build that learning community at the beginning. And as someone who does a lot of training, I would echo Christine's suggestion and also just say the more you can vary your modalities during training, so maybe you have pair share activities where they talk to each other or they have to do something and then report out to the full group. Really trying to use different training modalities to engage your participants will help with folks doing other things because you're asking them to actively participate in your training.
Excellent suggestion.
Anyone else have additions to how to engage folks during training?
Amy, this is Eric at CNCS. I will just quickly add one thing that we at least mentioned at supervisors orientation that would relate to subsites or supervisors mentioning to their subsites is that we put the trainings together for them not just because they're required and important, but because we have realized, and with the research we've done, that successful supervision is one of the best keys to successful vistas. So we're investing a lot of time and information into them because we're interested in helping them lead successful vistas, and that's helped us at least maintain supervisors' attention at orientation.
Thank you, Eric. That's helpful. So another question that's in our list that's been there for since earlier in the session I want to make sure we address is from Stacy Voigt, and she said, how are you funding the in-person training? What are the rough costs of the funding that would be needed to do your in-person training for sub-site?
Hi, this is Misty. I just wanted to say, in terms of funding our on-site orientations with the supervisors, it's actually funded through our budget for the Intermediary Vista project. And we do We do receive funds for training, and then we also take advantage of the cafe that we have here to provide them with meals since it is a 6-hour training. So I'm not sure, if your organization has a budget for your VISTA project and if you're able to use some of those funds to do an on-site orientation for your supervisors. If not, an alternative is to do them remotely or virtually.
Thank you.
Okay, so Lois, we have another question from Natasha, and she wants to know, have you had problems with site supervisors getting VISTAs to do things that are not included in their VAD and calling it professional development so that they can get VISTAs to do things that are not related? If so, how did you handle it? So has anyone had issues or have solutions for site supervisors getting VISTAs to do things that are not in their VAD so that they can have them do work that's not related to their VAD? Anybody have that experience and want to speak to it?
I can say something about that. Oh.
Okay. Jimmy and Misty can share. Who wants to
go ahead?
You want to go ahead?
Well, I was just going to say that in our sub-site supervisor orientations, we talk about differences between a VISTA and an employee, and we also talk about differences between a VISTA assignment description and an employee job description. One of those differences is the statement, other duties as needed. That statement is usually often at the end of employee job description, but it is not, and it should not be anywhere in a VISTA assignment description. And so, therefore, the supervisors must not assign the VISTA's duties that are outside of the VISTA assignment description. And just by saying that seems to make it clear to them that they shouldn't, be engaging in those activities. Despite that, we do get some VISTAs contacting us, when the site supervisors ask them to help out in other capacities that are outside of the VISTA assignment description. And we basically tell the VISTAs, and we also tell the supervisors. Again, we repeat what we went over in the orientation, and we also tell them that there is a difference between volunteering their time outside of being a VISTA and completing duties as a VISTA. So the VISTA can make a decision that, okay, I do want to help out, but it's because I'm volunteering my time and I'm not doing this as a part of my VISTA assignment description. Both the supervisor and the VISTA need to know that, the VISTA can say yes or no. So that's just what I was going to say.
Great, thank you. Jimmy?
So the way we handle it in some ways is similar. One of the things we actually do is prohibit the VISTAs from volunteering at their own sites. And that's just to avoid that confusion over whether or not they're a VISTA right now or they're a volunteer right now. And certainly, there's ways to maybe finesse that a little more. We've just found the easiest way is just to say they can volunteer in the community outside that time if they'd like, but let's not have them volunteer for your organization because the lines can blur. The other thing I just say is, as far as members doing things for professional development purposes, we actually say professional development isn't necessarily undertaking a task. It can be observing, it can be sitting in on, say, a panel of some sort. It can be asking questions while they're in, say, an executive board meeting. But they shouldn't be, for example, taking minutes during that. That's not professional development. In that case, they're doing something outside their VAD. So professional development we really define as an educational experience, not an experiential element, with very, very few exceptions. I can't think of a time where I've made one this year. So again, just really emphasizing very clear lines between what is and isn't appropriate. And then, again, just letting supervisors know, if they need extra help doing something, then, maybe VISTA is not the right program for them. There's, AmeriCorps State National is great and they do wonderful work and there's more flexibility, so maybe that would work better for them. And just, again, part of this is making sure you're checking in regularly with members to develop that good relationship with them, because sometimes members might feel like they're ratting someone out or something like that when they aren't. That's just part of their job. That's their duty to the American public, is to do what they've agreed to do and not do something that their supervisor is trying to finagle in as quote unquote a learning activity.
Great, thank you. We are at the top of the hour. It's 3 o'clock, and we want to honor everyone's time commitment for this webinar. So we probably need to officially end the webinar, but I think that if people want to wait for another, to go on for another 10 minutes or so with the Q&A, I'm happy to be here. And Jimmy and Misty, can you stay a little bit?
Yes, Misty.
Great.
Yep.
So for those of you who need to leave the webinar, be sure to fill out the evaluation that will come up as you log out. And thank you so much for joining us today. We will be posting both samples that we've talked about during this webinar and the recording of the webinar itself within a few days on the webinar site on the Supervisor campus. And for those of you who can stay, welcome, and let's keep going with questions.
Thanks, Lois. This is Amy. So we had a couple questions from several people asking about how much time people spend in their role as an intermediary for this sub-site. And so just curious for Misty and Jimmy, how much time do you think you spend doing this work to manage the sites that you work with?
My role is a full-time role, and so I would say I spend 100% of the time managing sub-sites, and we recruit like 5 times a year. So in terms of the orientations of sub-sites, they're going on all the time with our sister project.
I'm a half-time employee. I probably spend more like 22 to 23 hours a week managing our 10 different sites. We only have one cohort a year though, so there isn't. I don't have to worry about continually bringing people in and all of the craziness that goes with that. So it's definitely a very solid 20 hours a week at minimum for 10 sites. The equation basically is that per vista and per site, you should probably expect to devote on average about 2 hours a week, depending on how involved with them you're going to be.
Thank you. And I noticed that folks are also, if you want to join this conversation, the folks out there, to talk about how much time you spend, you can put your ideas in the chat panel. I see Natasha gave us an idea of how much time she's spending managing her 7 sub-sites in the chat panel. So another question came in about orienting your sub-sites, and the question is, how do you best conduct an orientation that integrates both new and returning sub-site supervisors? Misty or Jimmy, do you want to address that, one of you? How do you integrate both new and returning sub-site supervisors in your training?
This is Misty. We actually orient our new supervisors only, so we don't usually have returning supervisors attending our orientation. As long as they've completed it once, that's enough.
We actually do just one training, and we focus on the upcoming year. So a lot of the activities are, like for example, developing an on-site orientation plan, are going to be beneficial to both parties. And the way I see it is that CNCS policy is pretty nuanced, so everybody can use a refresher. So we actually don't do a different format of training though I would say that during the recruitment period and during the onboarding period, I do spend a lot more one-on-one time with new sites, you know, coaching them and working with them. So that's kind of how we accommodate the difference.
Great, thank you. That's very helpful. We have time for just a couple more questions. One came in from Robin, and she wants to know, what have other sites done to ensure that their sub-sites recruit and select a candidate in a timely manner? What have other sites done to ensure that sub-sites recruit and select a candidate in a timely manner?
This is Misty. I basically, as I mentioned during the presentation, I use a modified PSO recruitment calendar, and I contact supervisors throughout the recruitment cycle, but even more often closer to the deadline that the state office gives us, just so that I know where they are and so that I can see if they need any additional assistance.
Thank you, Misty. And I think this is a good time to plug our next webinar for May, which is going to be all about recruiting VISTA members. And so I encourage folks to join us for our webinar May 20th, which is about recruiting. And we'll have registration information up on the Supervisor webinars page on the campus very soon. So likely when you get your follow-up email from us, you'll be able to register for that webinar as well, which will include lots of tips and ideas for recruiting members and how to work with your sub-sites to do that effectively. So we had one more question come in from Stacy, and she wants to know, how do you bridge broad cultural differences? For example, working with Native American Indians would be an example from her community. And I know that we could do a whole webinar on this topic in and of itself, but anybody have ideas on how you bridge those broad cultural differences?
Yeah, we've actually worked with organizations that exclusively serve Indian reservations, and that is definitely you know, it's a delicate process. You know, I know a couple of the folks we've worked with have you know, been really apprehensive about you know, undertaking certain kinds of quantitative evaluation and, you know, needing sometimes more time to run things by tribal councils and all of that stuff. So, you know, I would kind of turn back to the be personally understanding but professionally firm. You know, effectively by taking a VISTA, you're taking a federal grant. And by taking a federal grant, you're agreeing to certain policies, procedures, and duties. And, you know, even if you're a little uncomfortable with doing, say, a quantitative evaluation of a member, well, you know, you agreed to that. And so not only, I think part of that is making sure that the expectations are clear up front and that everybody's okay with that. But also, you know, being personally understanding, you know, for example, if decisions might take more time and all of that stuff. And we also provide cultural competency training to all of our VISTA members when they come on board. So it's just another way to think about how you can, you know, show your respect for a different culture, but at the same time do your job. And so I just, again, professionally firm, personally understanding and accommodating, and trying to make arrangements before things, you know, become an issue.
Great, thank you, Jimmy.
So Lois, that's the end of our list of questions. I think we'll turn it back over to you now. Okay.
Well, I just wanted to thank everyone for taking the time to join our webinar and participate in our webinar. It's been very, very helpful, and hopefully you've begun to share with one another. And if you want to continue sharing with one another on this topic, you can go to the supervisor forums on the Vista campus and continue this track to explore these ideas with one another. With that, I want to again thank you and ask you if before you log out, if you could make sure you look at and fill out the evaluation. And thanks again, and hopefully we'll see you next month for the May webinar, and then after that for a June webinar. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.